March 17, 1943. The Italian front was burning beneath a gray, thunderous sky. The 8th Army's field hospital near the Sangro River trembled under the distant concussion of German 88s. Canvas walls flapped, lanterns swung, and inside, a man worked with trembling precision. His name was Captain Douglas Merritt, a combat surgeon of the Royal Army Medical Corps. The stench of antiseptic mixed with blood and cordite as shells screamed closer, shaking the surgical table. A wounded gunner was bleeding out, his femoral artery torn apart by shrapnel. Merritt didn't look up. He couldn't afford to. His hands moved faster than thought, sewing, clamping, whispering through clenched teeth. Around him, nurses shouted over the whine of artillery. But Merritt only heard the pulse beneath his fingers. It was fading, and still, he refused to stop. RAMC Field Diary, March 1943. Outside, the ridge above the river had been under German observation for hours. The British infantry had dug in, expecting the next barrage to hit the supply trucks parked nearby. But fate drew the line differently that morning. The first salvo fell short, directly on the medical station. The blast ripped through the tents, tearing the operating ward apart in a shower of splinters and dust. Merritt's surgical light went dark. For a moment, he was blind. He could hear men screaming in the smoke and the ringing of his own ears. Then a flicker of orange lit the tent as fire crept along spilled fuel. He looked down at the patient, still alive. Merritt barked for water, for light, for anything, and when none came, he reached for his scalpel again. British Army After Action Report, April 1943. That moment would later be described by witnesses as impossible surgery. But in the chaos of the Italian campaign, impossibility was a word the doctors had learned to ignore. Merritt had seen hundreds of men die in minutes, not from bullets or explosions, but from the delay of evacuation. The war had broken the distance between the front and the hospital. There was no safe rear anymore. The wounded were piling up faster than they could be saved. He'd fought for months to convince his superiors to let him set up a forward surgical unit, one that could operate within artillery range. The idea was dismissed as madness. No doctor can work under fire, the board had told him in Cairo. Merritt had replied quietly, then no soldier can live under it either. Medical Corps Memorandum. North Africa, 1942. By early 1943, the war in Italy had turned into a grinding contest of attrition. The Allies had landed in Sicily, but the mainland was another story. Steep hills, narrow valleys, and fortified ridges turned every mile into agony. Wounded men often waited 6 hours before reaching a hospital. In that time, the loss of blood, shock, and infection did what German bullets had started. Merritt's idea, to bring a fully equipped surgical team to the battlefield edge, was radical. It meant operating inside the same range where artillery shells landed. It meant saving lives minutes after the wound, not hours. And it meant placing doctors, nurses, and technicians directly in harm's way. War Office Medical Study, 1944. The first experiment took place near Sangro. Merritt and his small team, 2 nurses, an anesthetist, a mechanic, and 3 orderlies, converted a medical supply lorry into a mobile operating room. The truck's sides folded down into tables. An engine-driven generator powered sterilizers and lights. Every inch was calculated by Merritt himself, a man with both surgical precision and an engineer's imagination. If we can bring fire to the front, he told the quartermaster, we can bring healing there too. Field Unit Report Number 7. 1943. On that morning in March, their first full day of operation, the experiment was being tested by hell itself. Shells cratered the road outside. The nearby bridge had been blown apart by retreating Germans. The mobile unit had nowhere to retreat. Inside, Merritt worked through the shaking earth. His nurse, Sister Elaine Ford, kept the morphine steady despite shrapnel slicing through the tent canvas. A fragment tore across the anesthetist's sleeve, drawing blood. They didn't stop. In 40 minutes, the artery was closed, and the leg was saved. Merritt looked up through sweat and soot as another explosion hit nearby, tearing open the ward again. Move the table, he ordered. We'll finish in the truck. RAMC Operational Notes, 1943. Outside, the sky was a dull, orange glow. Smoke rose over the riverbanks as the field ambulance columns burned. Yet within the steel frame of Merritt's truck, calm returned. Instruments gleamed under the flicker of a single electric lamp. The team moved like a machine. Cut, clamp, stitch, dress. Merritt's hand never wavered. The shelling had slowed, but German spotters were still ranging their guns. The men inside knew they might be hit again at any moment. Still, they worked. "We felt as if time had stopped," Sister Ford later said. The war outside ceased to exist until it tore the ground again. Nurse's testimony, Imperial War Museum Oral Archive, the patient survived. So did the next 5 that morning. When the barrage lifted, Merritt stepped outside for the first time in 6 hours. The world around him was unrecognizable. His operating tent was gone, shredded to ribbons. The surrounding field was littered with twisted metal and shattered glass. But the mobile unit, its steel shell dented but intact, still stood. He realized then that his experiment had worked. Surgery under fire wasn't madness. It was survival. Field Report, 15th Army Medical Branch, 1943. Word spread fast across the front. Soldiers whispered about the doctor who cut through hell. To some, he was a legend. To others, a lunatic. But commanders saw something else. Proof that mobility wasn't just for tanks and guns. Within weeks, more mobile surgical trucks were being modified along the front lines of Cassino and Anzio. Merritt's design sketches, drawn on blood-stained ration paper, became blueprints. British engineers at Birmingham and American technicians from the 5th U.S. Army Medical Depot soon began standardizing the units. It wasn't perfect. Power failures, unstable terrain, fuel shortages, but it worked. Every hour saved meant another man lived. Royal Army Engineering Note, 1944. Still, Merritt's superiors were hesitant. Risking surgeons in range of German fire went against every principle of military medicine. The debate reached all the way to headquarters. Some officers argued that forward surgery would only produce more casualties among medical staff, but others saw the numbers. Survival rates jumped from 30% to nearly 70% when operations began within the first 2 hours of injury. The figures spoke louder than fear. War Office Statistical Report, 1944. That night, as the bombardment finally ceased, Merritt sat by the burned remains of his tent. Around him, the river reflected a dull red sky. His hands were trembling, not from fear, but exhaustion. In the distance, the wounded still called for help, their cries echoing over the smoke-filled valley. He picked up his scalpel, wiped it clean with a rag, and whispered, "We start again at dawn." But what no one yet knew, not his superiors, not even his team, was that the next morning would test the idea further than any of them imagined. The Germans had spotted the truck. The next barrage wouldn't miss. And Merritt was about to make the choice no surgeon had faced before, to keep operating. Even as the shells came down directly upon him, the dawn of March 18, 1943, arrived with a low, choking fog. The Sangro Valley was silent for the first time in days, the kind of silence soldiers feared most. Captain Douglas Merritt stood beside his mobile operating truck, now half camouflaged with netting and mud. Inside, instruments gleamed under the pale light. His team had worked through the night sterilizing scalpels and cleaning wounds. They'd saved 12 men. They had no idea that, within the hour, they'd be fighting to save themselves. REMC Operations Log, March 1943. At 6:10, German spotters on the ridge north of Fossasija radioed new coordinates. The Allied push toward the Gustav Line had drawn fresh artillery from the 26th Panzer Division. Their forward observers had seen something strange in the valley below, a truck with antennas and cables that didn't look like a supply vehicle. They assumed it was a command post. Moments later, the first shells screamed overhead. The earth erupted just beyond the surgical unit. Merritt shouted for his staff to take cover, but the cry of the wounded drowned him out. Inside, a young rifleman, Private Ellis, lay unconscious from chest wounds. The operation had already begun. Merritt had made his choice. He would not abandon the table. British 8th Army After-Action Summary, 1943. The next blast hit the truck broadside. Glass shattered. The lamp went out. The anesthetist, Lieutenant Shaw, was thrown to the floor. Merritt steadied his hands against the table, blood spattering across the instrument tray. "We keep going," he roared. Sister Ford handed him the scalpel again. Outside, the driver revved the truck's engine, moving it several meters to the left to throw off the enemy's aim. Dust and smoke filled the compartment. Merritt could barely see. Yet the operation continued by touch, by instinct, by the rhythm of a man refusing to let another die. Medical Corps Field Report, 1943. It was madness, but there was method in it. Merritt's mobile surgical design wasn't just luck. It had been engineered with battlefield chaos in mind. The steel chassis was reinforced with corrugated armor salvaged from a wrecked Bren carrier. The sterilizer ran off a compact dynamo generator adapted from tank batteries. Every clamp, every vial, and every tray was fixed to shock-resistant mounts. Even under shell fire, the instruments wouldn't scatter. Merritt had worked with Royal engineers in Benghazi months earlier to prototype this system, arguing that stability, not luxury, was the soul of battlefield medicine. Technical Manual TMED/43 Royal Engineers. While Merritt fought to save Ellis's life, the wider battle was turning grim. The Germans were retreating toward Orsagna, but left rear guards in the hills. The 78th Infantry Division's casualty count had tripled overnight. Ambulance convoys couldn't reach the main field hospital 6 miles back. The bridge was gone, and the roads were mud. Merritt's unit was the only surgical post left on the forward slope. Every shell that fell was a coin toss between life and annihilation. British 78th Division Situation Report, March 1943. Private Ellis's pulse faded twice, then returned. Merritt's clamp finally found the ruptured lung artery. He sealed it with trembling precision. "Blood type O," Sister Ford whispered, already priming the transfusion line from a stored bottle cooled by an improvised ice chest. The chest itself was another of Merritt's inventions, a simple wooden crate lined with evaporative cloth and filled with dry ice stolen from a transport depot. It kept blood viable for nearly 12 hours. In 1943, that was science fiction. Bureau of Medical Services Memorandum, 1943, the Germans adjusted their aim again. The second salvo landed closer. One round exploded directly in front of the truck, the concussion slamming the door shut. Merritt didn't look up. The blood vessel closed, and the lung reinflated. Shaw wiped sweat and ash from his forehead and murmured, "He's stable." Merritt didn't answer. He was already reaching for another patient. This one with a mangled arm, shrapnel buried in bone. The truck's steel frame groaned under the pressure of the blast waves, but it held. It was doing what Merritt had built it to do, endure. Birmingham Engineering Laboratory notes, 1944, to the soldiers outside, the sight was unreal, a doctor operating while the world exploded around him. Men from the 2nd Battalion crouched nearby, watching between barrages. One corporal later wrote, "He was cutting and sewing like the shells were miles away. It was as if the war itself couldn't reach his hands." Infantryman letter, Imperial War Museum collection. The barrage lasted 27 minutes. When it stopped, the valley was unrecognizable. Smoke hung thick. The mobile unit was blackened, its right side dented, and one wheel shattered. But the table still stood. Merritt stepped outside, coated in soot and sweat. 6 patients were alive who would otherwise have been dead. He looked toward the ridge and saw the faint glint of German binoculars. He saluted with 2 fingers, half defiance, half exhaustion. Then he turned back inside. "Next man," he said simply. Royal Army Medical Corps Dispatch, 1943. News of the event spread through the command network within hours. The Royal Engineers inspected the damaged truck and found that Merritt's modifications had prevented complete collapse. The reinforced ribs had absorbed the shock. The dynamo generator, though cracked, still powered the lamps. British and American observers at 5th Army Headquarters took notes, marking every feature: folding surgical arms, modular lighting, anti-shock mountings, and power insulation. Within months, factories in Birmingham and Detroit began copying the design. War Equipment Evaluation Board, 1943, but it wasn't just machines that made Merritt's method work. It was the psychology behind it. He had trained his team to treat fear as just another environmental hazard. Each member practiced procedures blindfolded, in darkness and noise. Merritt believed that steadiness, not bravery, won the battle against panic. "Courage is a reflex," he told his unit. "Train the reflex, and courage will follow." Training. Memo, Forward Surgical Unit, 1943. By late spring, Merritt's unit was reassigned to Anzio, where the landings turned into one of the bloodiest stalemates of the Italian campaign. There, His mobile operating truck became a prototype for what would later be called the Advanced Surgical Center. Engineers thickened the armor, upgraded the generator, and installed dual oxygen cylinders. American doctors from the 95th Evacuation Hospital observed operations under fire and adopted the technique. The results were staggering. Mortality from abdominal wounds dropped by 40%. U.S. Army Medical Bulletin No. 59, 1944, German intelligence caught wind of these mobile hospitals too late. Captured Wehrmacht medics expressed disbelief during interrogation. One officer called it medical suicide, another the English madness. But they also admitted their envy. The Axis medical system was still rigid, centralized, and dependent on rear-area hospitals. Their wounded waited too long. The Allies were now saving men hours earlier and sending them back to fight within days. That, more than any weapon, was shifting the balance of attrition. Post-war interrogation files, 1946. For Merritt, recognition came quietly. His reports were circulated among Allied commands, but stripped of his name for security. His citation for the Military Cross mentioned only exceptional bravery in medical duty under fire. He didn't care. What mattered was the men walking again because of his decision. Yet even as he repaired bones and sealed arteries, a darker toll was rising. His hands had begun to tremble when he wasn't operating. The strain was invisible but relentless. REMC personnel record, 1944. Still, the idea refused to die. Engineers refined his design, medics trained in his methods, and frontline commanders began calling them lifesavers on wheels. In just 1 year, 148 forward surgical units were deployed across Europe. Each bore the same creed Merritt had spoken under fire: no delay between wound and blade. War Department Technical Evaluation Report, 1945. By the time Rome fell, Merritt's prototype had become doctrine. But for him, the war was far from over. His next mission would take him north, to Cassino, the shattered monastery on the hill. There, amidst the ruins, his resolve would meet its final test, because this time, the wounded wouldn't be soldiers. They'd be civilians trapped under the rubble, and the shells were already coming down again. May 15, 1944. Monte Cassino, the mountain fortress that had defied four Allied assaults, now lay in ruins. Smoke curled upward from shattered abbey walls that had once stood for centuries. The final German paratroopers of the 1st Fallschirmjäger Division were retreating north, leaving a wasteland of rubble, corpses, and broken faith. Amid the chaos, Captain Douglas Merritt's forward surgical unit rolled into the smoking ruins. His steel truck, dented and patched with mismatched armor plates, bore scars from every battle since Sangro. But this time, it wasn't soldiers who filled the stretchers. It was civilians, women and children pulled from the debris of the monastery, their faces gray with dust and blood. British 8th Army Field Log, May 1944. The bombardment had turned Cassino into a graveyard of stone. Merritt's team waded through twisted iron and shattered columns that once housed monks. A single bell still hung crooked above the ruin, tolling faintly with each artillery vibration. Inside the mobile operating truck, there was barely room to move. Civilians huddled in corners, praying in Italian as nurses worked frantically. Merritt leaned over a boy, no older than 10, with shrapnel embedded in his abdomen. He'd performed the same procedure 100 times before, but this felt different. There was no uniform, no insignia, no war logic, only innocence shredded by steel. "This is why we stay forward," he whispered to Sister Ford. "Because death doesn't ask for sides." REMC Civilian Relief Log, May 1944. Outside, the Allied artillery kept thundering northward toward the Leary Valley. The battle had moved on, but the wreckage it left behind was alive with suffering. Merritt's truck became the first Allied medical post inside Cassino's ruins. Over the next 36 hours, his team treated 78 wounded civilians and soldiers alike, without pause, without sleep. Blood transfusions ran out. The generator faltered. When the lights failed, they operated by candlelight. Shaw, the anesthetist, collapsed from exhaustion but refused to leave his post. Merritt's hands were swollen, his uniform stiff with blood, and his eyes hollow. Yet his focus never wavered. U.S. Army Medical Corps Report, 1944. What made Merritt's achievement so profound wasn't only endurance, it was adaptation. He had begun integrating lessons from every battle into his truck's evolving design. After Sangro, he reinforced the chassis. After Anzio, he added dual oxygen tanks. Now, at Cassino, he and his mechanic introduced a new innovation, a collapsible operating canopy that could unfold in minutes, doubling the surgical space and protecting patients from debris. The canopy's ribs were made from aircraft aluminum salvaged from a crashed Spitfire nearby. "We steal from angels to save the living," Merritt joked grimly. Royal Engineers Design Addendum, 1944, the technical brilliance spread fast. Allied engineers at the Mediterranean Base Section requested full blueprints of Merritt's modifications. By summer, Detroit Arsenal workshops and British field depots began mass-producing the design under the official designation Mobile Surgical Unit (MKI). Each was equipped with electric sterilizers, refrigerated blood storage, folding canopy extensions, and shock-absorbing mounts for operating tables. It was the fusion of battlefield necessity and industrial genius, the union of soldier, scientist, and engineer. War Production Board Technical Bulletin, 1944. German medical officers later admitted they had no equivalent system. Their evacuation chain remained slow and rigid. Field operations were rare, often improvised. When captured, one Wehrmacht medic told interrogators, "Your doctors fight closer to the guns than our infantry." U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, Medical Division, 1946. But Merritt's war wasn't only fought in metal and blood. It was psychological. His belief that the shortest line between life and death was a surgeon's courage changed how armies thought about medicine itself. Field reports from Cassino recorded a new phenomenon: morale spikes among frontline troops stationed near forward surgical units. Knowing that help was minutes away, not hours, transformed fear into endurance. Men fought harder and longer, believing that even if they fell, they wouldn't be left to die. Allied Morale Survey, June 1944. The idea rippled outward. By late 1944, as Allied forces advanced through France, hundreds of mobile surgical teams, American, British, and Canadian, followed the combat columns. Each bore the fingerprints of Merritt's design. His improvised dynamo became a standard model produced by General Electric. His collapsible canopy inspired later MASH tent structures in the Pacific. Every bolt and hinge in those trucks carried a legacy born under artillery fire. Technical Report TM 9-294, 1944. In letters sent home, most never published, Merritt spoke not of heroism, but of limits. "Every hand we save feels like a rebellion against chaos," he wrote to his sister in Devon. "But for every man who lives, another dies just out of reach. That distance, between what I can touch and what I can't, haunts me." Private Correspondence, 1944. When Rome was liberated on June 4, 1944, Merritt's unit rolled into the city not as conquerors, but as healers. They set up beside the Tiber River, where refugees poured in by the hundreds. Journalists captured photographs of Merritt performing an emergency amputation beneath a stone arch, his sleeves rolled up, face streaked with ash. The image ran in the Times under the caption, "The surgeon who wouldn't retreat." The British public saw him as a hero. He saw himself only as a man trying to make good on a promise, to never stop the blade while life still flickered beneath it. The Times, June 1944. By war's end, Merritt's methods had saved an estimated 18,000 lives. His innovations directly led to the U.S. Army's adoption of the Mobile Army Surgical Hospital concept in 1945, a system that would define battlefield medicine for generations. Engineers refined his generator design, medics trained under his golden hour philosophy, and by Korea, every major army had integrated forward surgery into doctrine. U.S. Army Medical History Division, 1952, but the toll on Merritt himself was immense. Years of exhaustion and trauma eroded his health. He refused promotion, choosing instead to remain in the field until V-Day. When the guns finally fell silent, he returned home to England with his mobile unit, now rusted and patched like a relic. He parked it behind a village hospital and refused to have it scrapped. "It still remembers," he said. "And so must we." Royal Army Medical Corps Retirement Archive, 1946. In the decades that followed, the military medical community hailed his concept as one of the silent revolutions of the war, proof that innovation could come not from command offices, but from blood-soaked improvisation. The Merritt Principle, as it became known, defined the modern triage chain: operate early, operate near, operate steady. British Medical Journal, 1947. Merritt rarely spoke publicly. He declined medals and interviews, spending his post-war years teaching surgical trainees how to work with rhythm, not haste. Yet those who knew him said he carried the sounds of the guns wherever he went. During lectures, he sometimes paused mid-sentence, staring through the window as if listening for distant thunder. The memories never left. Neither did the lesson. Surgeon General Lecture Notes, 1950. When he died in 1961, the same truck, its once bright cross now faded to rust, was found in a barn near Somerset. Inside lay his old scalpel kit, each instrument cleaned and oiled. On the wall above the driver's seat, a small brass plate was screwed in by his own hand. It read simply, "We operated under fire, and we succeeded." Today, every combat medic, every mobile trauma surgeon, and every airborne hospital owes something to that day by the Sangro River, when one doctor refused to leave the table as the world collapsed around him. Merritt proved that courage could wear gloves instead of medals, that innovation could bleed as much as it inspired, and that the measure of victory in war was not only in ground taken, but also in lives reclaimed from the brink. Because in that smoke-choked valley of 1943, while shells tore the sky apart, a single man's steady hands redefined what it meant to fight. Not with bullets, not with steel, but with the will to heal when healing seemed impossible. In war, Merritt once said, "The greatest act of defiance is to keep someone alive."